Namaste and welcome to a lesson in Integrative Vedic Astrology Counseling. Today we're going to focus on the first house, or the ascendant, which is the first of the three dharma or life purpose houses, and we're going to learn how it's the vessel, the mode of transportation, or the skin that we've acquired in this incarnation for the ride of our life. We're going to learn how its development is the source of our greatest strength as well as our greatest weakness. Now I'm going to be using the terms rising sign, ascendant, and first house interchangeably, just simply out of habit. And I'm also going to be using two Sanskrit terms, lagna and tanu, which are used to describe the first house. So what is the first house? First house is the rising sign because it's determined by the zodiac sign rising in the eastern horizon on Earth at the moment we take our first breath. In Sanskrit, we call the first house lagna. Lagna simply means two objects touching each other, or the intersection or connection of two things. This is such a beautiful word to use here because what it's describing is that our birth time is stamped by the unique karmic intersection of cosmic time with earth time. So we are cosmic beings having an earthly experience, or divine intelligence taking form on earth. And in order to function on earth, we need a vessel, we need a receptacle, we need a container of some type. And so the first house serves as our unique physical body-mind type. In Sanskrit, we also call the first house tanu. Tanu just means body consciousness or body or form of some type. So when we are interpreting a horoscope, we look at the first house, we look at the ruler of the first house, we look at the planets in the first house, and we get a picture of what type of form or transportation we acquired in this incarnation. And then we look at then we get a picture of how well that form corresponds to our ability to navigate the mandate of the zodiac sign that corresponds to our ascendant. Because remember, the first house is the first of the dharma or life purpose houses. It's what inspires us. It's our inspiration. So there's always a desire within us to fulfill its mandate. You know the expression being comfortable in your skin? That's a good way to look at the first house, because it describes how comfortable we are in our skin. A well-disposed first house is comfortable in its skin. It's at ease in its skin. A not so well-disposed first house will be at dis-ease. A well-disposed first house is relaxed, it's self-assured. It finds it easier to fulfill the mandate of the corresponding zodiac sign. Or in other words, the person is at home with themselves, their abilities, their capabilities, their purpose, and their desires. And life also meets them in that way. They get into situations that matches that. Now the inspiration or purpose doesn't have to be anything grand. It can simply be the desire to excel in domestic life or our inner life, which corresponds to the Cancer ascendant, or to excel in our public life, like Capricorn ascendant. The point is that a good first house is at ease and is comfortable in whatever it sets out to do, or it feels it has to do. If we are not at ease with the element and the zodiac sign of our first house, we will usually over-identify or under-identify with it. We'll try to emulate a life path that doesn't correspond with our inner knowing. And we'll get frustrated because our efforts, no matter how hard we try, won't yield the results we want. Now, we don't want to panic because the vast majority of us will have a challenging first house. It will have some lack. And this is what the astrologers call planetary afflictions. Not a pretty term. And what yogis call the burden of our karma. But that's the whole point. The hero's journey that we are embarking on is meant to be challenging. But in my experience, what makes the hero's journey difficult is not having to modify the limitations of our first house. It's never knowing that we needed to adapt in the first place. So, Vedic astrology counseling is different from many other types of counseling because the counsel you receive or give each person is unique to their particular karmic ecosystem. We know that the practical and worry-filled Capricorn first house will always carry its ambition, its responsibility, and its anxiety into domestic life, into relationships, into career, and even into its spiritual quest. Just as the imaginative and the expansive Pisces ascendant will bring its impractical, dreamy, and go-with-the-flow tendencies into every endeavor it takes on. Telling them to do otherwise is like telling the hard earth element to flow like water. Of course, our personality is much, much more than just our first house. And the correct way to interpret a horoscope is by looking at it in its entirety and synthesizing the complex blend of all the centers of our personality expressed by each of the planets in each of the zodiac signs and the houses 2 through 12, especially the sun and the moon, which are considered ascendants in their own right. So your moon sign and your sun sign will become secondary ascendants. Add to that the influences of the current Dasha Bhukti periods, or the planetary periods. And in Vedic astrology, we also have Varga charts, the divisional charts, and nakshatras, or the star constellations. And that adds a lot of complexity. But human beings are very complex. But still, the ascendant, the first house, remains the most important factor of all the houses because it's the spokesperson or the guardsman to all the other houses. So all incoming experiences from our environment will be filtered through the first house before merging into the agenda of the other houses. In the same way, all the outgoing experiences will also filter out through the ascendant. So you could say that the first house is how we meet life, how we make sense of the world. It's our primary defining force, and it's the very essence in our psyche of what we think life is all about. Of course, the problems we run into is that everybody else has their own unique first house. So you can start to see the limitations of this house as well. Briefly, from a psychological perspective, the first house describes the environment into which we were born, our early years, perhaps from 0 to 3. And it will reflect if you were born in a house with low ceilings, and if you learned early to walk with your shoulders a little hunched, or were you born in a house with soaring ceilings and you learned to walk with your chest expanded. If the first house is struggling, is weak, or overly restricted, even if the other houses in the chart foretell success. So for example, you could have a stellar 10th house or a stellar 4th house, and they may deliver the success they promise. But you may still struggle with your hunched shoulders, even in adulthood. In the same way, if the first house is strong, the limitations of the rest of the houses cancels out to some degree, as the foundation is strong. And now, for those of you working in Ayurveda or medical therapies, the first house is also very important, because from it we judge the overall health and vitality, that the quality of the tanu, or the body and form we acquired for this journey. It sums up our genetic predisposition, the environment of the womb that we were in. It gives, the early childhood interventions that we received, which set the stage for our vitality and vigor for the rest of our life. When using Vedic astrology counseling as a tool, we first need to help our client or ourselves gain self-knowledge of our first house. And then, of course, slowly off all the other houses. But most importantly, we guide them to identify the challenges and the opportunities of their first house. And then we steer them into learning how to become more comfortable in their skin. Now we are ready to work on the deeper spiritual work of relaxing the hold the first house has on us. You know, there's a tendency in modern New Age culture to jump into deep spiritual practices before we are ready. When we do that, the mandate and the desires of our first house are still lurking around unconsciously in the shadows, waiting to be acknowledged. And they need to be acknowledged. So now let's consider the Sanskrit word Tanu again, chosen by the yogis to describe the first house, but it also means small, weak, insignificant, and frail. Why? Remember, the primary goal of Vedic teachings is freedom from body consciousness, or moksha, or emancipation from the limited aspect of the selfhood of our first house. So the Vedic seers were letting us know that over-reliance on the Tanu, or our selfhood, can leave us in a frail state. That doesn't make a hero. So using Joseph Campbell's template of the hero's journey, all archetypical heroes' journeys begin with a call to adventure, which requires a strong first house, a strong sense of I-ness, without which we might refuse the call. You see that in stories, in Harry Potter, in Star Wars. The hero is has a humdrum life, and he has an opportunity, a call to adventure. And it's the strength of his first house that says, okay, I'm going to go out and do this. But Joseph Campbell showed us that at the end of the journey, the hero sheds his selfhood. In astrology, we see the same thing. We start out our journey in the first house, and we end in the 12th house, where we surrender our sense of I, our I-ness, our Tanu, our transportation. And you see that again in many myths and stories. After the hero has fought his enemies and gone through all the trials and tribulations, he finally just walks away into the sunset, no longer identified with his original mandate. So once you study Vedic astrology, this paradox, this parallel paradox I'm talking about, of embracing our first house while unlearning its limitations, becomes crystal clear. The first house is just the receptacle or the form we acquired for our journey. It is who we are, but it's not who we are. And life's struggles usually ensue because we over-identify or we under-identify with our form, forgetting that our true identity is cosmic. So remember to wear your first house skin lightly, to be at ease with it, but wear it lightly, and not take yourself too seriously, your first house too seriously, so we can remember that we are divine consciousness contained in this earthly Tanu, or body-mind complex. Ultimately, that is really the only way we can ever truly be comfortable in our skin. Thank you. Namaste. I hope you enjoyed this lesson.